It has been a wonderful Advent and Christmas season around our church. I was reflecting on Christmas Day how grateful I was for this community and just for all of the people who were involved through our Advent season and our Christmas Eve services. We had over 70 people on Christmas Eve in the afternoon and evening who helped with ushering and greeting and handing out candles. And then, of course, we had our beautiful musicians who just offer their gifts and their talents to us as a community in grace. So we're just appreciative of them. I'm appreciative to the people who decorated all through the Advent season, kind of moving poinsettias around and moving decorations as our need for worship changed. There's just so much to be grateful for as we kind of come through this Advent season and have had Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. There was 139 of us who worshiped down at the historic chapel on Christmas Eve morning for our Advent service down there. Out of curiosity, how many of you were down there on that morning? Oh my gosh, quite a few of you. So you all played sardines that morning, and you kind of squished yourself in to make room for everybody else. We lit our last Advent candle that morning, and then of course that evening and afternoon, like I said, we had 4 services where we gathered as a community, and we sang Silent Night, and we passed the light of Christ around to each other. We lit our last Christ candle, and then at the end of the service, we sang a praise song. Isn't this how most Christmas Eves go? I was thinking about how many Christian churches in the United States participated in that ritual that we did that night, passing of the light, singing Silent Night, and then singing a praise song afterwards. All of the Christians around the country and even around the world that were doing that with us on that afternoon and evening. I was thinking about how it would be incomplete, though, if we ended with the Silent Night and the candle. Imagine that, what that would be like for us. If we all lit our candles and then at the end of Silent Night, we blew them out and that was the end of the service. It would feel a little incomplete without that final praise song that we sing at the end of our Christmas Eve service. We'd go home feeling a little bit empty, like it really wasn't complete. And this is a little bit about how kind of joy bubbles up in us. We go through this period of waiting where we're sitting on the edges of our seat, and then that moment that we think that Christ has been born every single year, Christ is born at that moment, and we just have this joy that bubbles up inside us, so we have to sing this praise song. And I was thinking, this is a little bit like watching one of our favorite sports teams. Oh, really, Kelly? Watching a favorite sports team is like Christmas Eve? Hang with me here. So when you're watching your favorite sports team, you're sitting on the edge of your seat, right? Just waiting for your team to do something good. And then at that moment that your team does something good, something just bubbles out of you, right? You can't control yourself. What do? You cheer, right? You stand up, you clap, you cheer, touchdown, Dick's doing touchdown in the back, right? This is what it's like, and this is what Christmas Eve is like. All this anticipation during Advent, we're sitting on the edge of our seat, right? And then there's this moment of Silent Night where we're sure Jesus gets born, and we sing our last praise song. There is a couple movies in our Christian folklore that we have here in the United States that kind of have this idea with it. It's this theme of kind of a waiting and then a bubbling up in joy happens all through kind of our Christian cultural symbols and literature and music and movies and all of that. So if you take a second, just try to think of some movies that might have this idea of just joy that just bubbles up and comes out of some characters at the end of the movie. Anybody want to take a guess at what those movies might be? There's lots of them. A Christmas Carol, we're going to talk about in a second. Anybody else want to come up with another one? It's a Wonderful Life is another one. Anybody else want to come up with any others? After the first service, somebody came. There it is, Holly Grinch Stole Christmas. After the first service, somebody came up to me after worship and said, hey, you should also talk about how the Grinch stole Christmas. And I said, good idea, I'll talk about it at second service. So yes, the Grinch stole Christmas is another one of those, right? So with the Christmas Carol and with It's a Wonderful Life, here we have some main characters, Scrooge, right, and George Bailey. And these two characters go through some incredible transformation in the movie. And then towards the end of the movie, there's just like this moment where just joy just like exudes from them, bubbles up from them. It just overtakes them and overflows in them. In the Christmas Carol, this guy named Scrooge is kind of a mean guy in his life, not nice at all, but he's visited in the middle of the night by three spirits, Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future. And what these spirits do is they open up Scrooge's eyes to what he's missing all around him. And in him being able to see all these things that are happening around him that he's missing, his heart also becomes open. And he has this moment of transformation. And in that, there's this joy that just bubbles out of him. And here's what that looks like in that movie.
O'clock. And daylight. But what day? Hello, you there, boy.
Me, sir?
Yes, you, my good fellow. What day is today?
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day, of course.
Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits did it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like, of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello.
Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, on the corner?
I should hope I did.
Intelligent boy, remarkable boy. Do you know if they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there?
What, the one as big as me?
Delightful boy. Pleasure talking to you. Yes, the one as big as you.
It's hanging there now.
Well, go and buy it. Yes, go and buy it and bring them round so that I may tell them where to deliver it. Come back with the man, I'll give you a shilling. Come back in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. I must stress myself. So much to do. I don't want to lose any time. I was like a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Merry Christmas to everybody, and a Happy New Year to the world!
So there is Scrooge at his after his moment of transformation where he just couldn't help himself. Uninhibited joy just flows out of him. So let's talk about It's a Wonderful Life. Our main character is George Bailey, of course. And George had made some kind of error in his business, in his banking business, and he hit complete rock bottom. He thought that he was worthless. He thought that his life was hopeless. Things were going terrible for him. And somehow he ends up on this bridge. Hard to know exactly what happened after he got to the bridge. But he goes into this alternative reality where God sends the angel, who remembers the name? Clarence, right? The angel Clarence was sent to George Bailey, and an angel takes him through different parts of his life where he can really see the significance of his life and see the impact that he's made on others. And in that, just like with Scrooge, George's eyes become open, and in his eyes becoming open, his heart becomes open, and he kind of goes back to regular reality. And again, there's just this moment of joy with George Bailey too.
George. Bert, do you know me?
Know you? You kidding? I've been looking all over town trying to find you. I saw your car piled into that tree down there, and I thought maybe you... Hey, your mouth's bleeding. Are you sure you're all right?
What you... My mouth's bleeding, Bert! My mouth's bleeding! Zoot pedals. Zoot. There they are! Bert! What do you know about that? Merry Christmas!
Well, Merry Christmas.
Merry! Merry! Yay! Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls! Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas, George. Merry Christmas, George.
Merry Christmas, Movie House! Merry Christmas, Emporium! Merry Christmas, you wonderful Billy and Lone! Hey! Merry Christmas, Mr. Potter!
Happy New Year to you! In jail. Go on home, they're waiting for you.
Mary! 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 Well, hello, Mr. Bank Examiner. How?
Mr. Bailey, there's a debt.
I know, $8,000.
George, I've got a little paper.
I'll bet it's a warrant for my arrest. Isn't it wonderful? I'm going to jail. Merry Christmas. Reporters are... Where's Mary? Mary! Oh, look at this wonderful...
Isn't it wonderful? I'm going to jail. I love that line in that movie. Yeah, so again, here it is, right? Moment of transformation, and there's this joy that just bubbles out of him, too, just like with Scrooge. So during this month of December, we've been talking about the Psalms a little bit. And the Psalms really are about human emotion, just completely bubbling out of people. In the Psalms, there are pieces of poetry, there's songs that are written, and in poetry and in songs, this is what we have, is like the kind of the raw, deep human emotion and experience coming out of people in words, kind of like our real, our authentic selves that flows out of us. We have sadness, we have desire, we have lament, we have bargaining with God, we have joy, we have praise, all that show up in our Psalms. I have a couple friends who are songwriters. And I was talking with one of them named Heather Lynn one day about kind of the songwriting process. And I was inquiring with her, like, how do you write songs? Like, what does that actually look like to you? Like, do you have to think really hard about the words and come up with just different alternatives and kind of, edit and scratch and kind of like look to maybe do some research on what might be good things to put into the song and things like that? And she was laughing about it and she said, not at all. That's not at all what it's like. Of course, me trying to be all intellectual about it, right? I was kind of comparing it to what it might be like to write a sermon. And she said, no, it's not at all like that, that the words are already in her, is what she said. That the words of the songs are wrapped up in raw emotion, in the human experience, and they're in there and they're bound up with this stuff. And when she is able to, like when the Spirit comes over her, she's able to open herself up. And those words then become unbound from that emotion and they just start to flow out of her. And then her songs kind of reflect the human experience. I thought, oh, that's so good. Wish I had that thing. I just don't. But I thought, this is probably what it was like for our psalm writers too. If you think about it, right? All this human experience, this human emotion, the human condition inside of them. And our psalm today is going to be a psalm of praise. And it just, uninhibited raw praise comes out of our songwriter today. This songwriter was so moved by the presence of God that he just couldn't help but sing this song of praise. So we're going to read Psalm 33, 1 through 9 today. We're actually going to read it as a community today. So I invite you to join your voice with my voice for Psalm 33. All you who are righteous, shout joyfully to the Lord. It's right for those who do right to praise God. Give thanks to the Lord with a lyre. Sing praises to him with a 10-stringed harp. Sing to him a new song. Play your best with joyful shouts. Because the Lord's word is right. His every act is done in good faith. He loves righteousness and justice. The Lord's faithful love fills the whole earth. The skies were made by the Lord's word. all their starry multitude by the breath of his mouth. He gathered the ocean waters into a heap. He put the deep seas into storerooms. All the earth honors the Lord. All the earth's inhabitants stand in awe of him, because when he spoke, it happened. When he commanded, it was theirs. Song of praise flowed out of this psalmist. Dan and I, every once in a while, have a conversation about the joy that seems to be present in our church right now. And it doesn't mean that every single one of our lives are easy and perfect and just how it's supposed to be. Just because we as a community are feeling joy, it doesn't mean that we personally don't have challenges in our own lives. And it doesn't mean that as a church community, we don't have challenges ahead of us as a congregation either. All of that is true. And we as a congregation can still feel incredible joy. I started to think about, well, where does this joy come from that we're experiencing right now as a church community? And one of the things I think about is the leadership of Dan. I know that Dan often in worship will give people kudos. He'll thank our musicians and our projectionists and our readers and all of that. But not very often does anybody thank Dan for the work that he does, so I'm going to do that today. His leadership is steadfast. He's a model for how we should act. And with that just comes a great amount of joy that can happen in our community because at the front of our organization, we just have just an incredible model. I was also thinking that over the last year and a half, we have been praying these breakthrough prayers. You remember these, right? We've been doing them. About a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, we started them right before I came. I think you guys were starting your first breakthrough prayer. Where literally, as a church, we are inviting God to break through in our lives personally and to break through in the life of our congregation. And when we don't have prayers, you'll probably notice that it shows up in our liturgy. It shows up kind of in our calls of worship. It shows up in sometimes the things we say up here, that we're incorporating that language into our worship. Now, I don't want you guys to get the idea that, if we just pray this stuff, then God all of a sudden is going to break through and become presence in our midst. That's not really how it works. We know as United Methodists, it's different than that God's grace is always present with us, that God is always in our midst. That's just how grace works. But when we pray these prayers or we use this breakthrough language and we ask for ourselves to be open to God breaking through, what it does is it opens our own eyes up. It opens our own hearts up to the work that God is already doing in our community, in our lives, and in our world. And I started to think, some of the joy that we're feeling around here is probably due to this. As we open up ourselves, open up our eyes, open up our lives, open up our hearts to the work of God, and we become aware of it, there's this joy that then just starts to bubble up, starts to move out of us, kind of uninhibited joy that just flows through us. And in some ways, it feels like that's what we're experiencing as a community right now. This is a little bit like Scrooge and George Bailey, isn't it? Where they had troubles, they had to have this moment of transformation, and it was in the opening themselves up that they felt this joy. I want to end with a picture that I took at the 3:00 service at Christmas Eve. Now, I know that this isn't all that unusual of a picture for our church. This is the type of picture that gets snapped often around here. It's a picture of one of our little gals dancing during one of the songs that the Wings Band was doing. It was the offering song that you guys did that was just amazing during our 3:00 and our 5:00 service. And when we take pictures like this as a community, sometimes they show up on Facebook, on social media, and things like that. You guys have seen them, right? We have a video of kids dancing in the grove, pictures of kids up here dancing. And every once in a while, a couple times, I've had a friend who's not affiliated with our church ask me, so is that planned? Like, do you guys plan to do that in your worship services? Or do you prep the kids to do that? And I'm like, nope, not in our church. In our church, our kids feel so moved that they have this uninhibited joy that we don't try to stifle, that we let flow out of them. And this is just a spontaneous thing that happens because the joy is bubbling out of them. As we move into 2018, this picture is a great reminder of who we are. We are a community that is touching the lives of children so much that they're willing to come up in front of a whole bunch of people and dance. We are a community that is reminding each other and our bigger community about how the Lord of love and life and light is working in each other's lives. We have a story of a God who literally broke through into the world to absolutely convince us to be a constant reminder that there is love and there is light and there is joy. And when we recognize that, when our eyes and our hearts become open to that, we sing and we praise and we rejoice. Just like this little girl, just like Scrooge, just like George Bailey, just like the psalmist. Because we get in touch with that light and that love and that joy and that peace. It's inside of us, and we recognize the awesomeness of it. And we just can't help but have it bubble from us.